If you think hospitals are safe places, think again. These hospital horror stories prove that the real nightmare begins when the ambulance siren fades away. Like in the story you're about to hear, where paramedics find a man almost decomposing in a dark park. A hellish sight and a stench of death they could never forget. But before we jump into the story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any horror stories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. I remember the smell before I saw anything. It was like someone had left rotten meat in the sun for weeks. A suffocating mix of decay and filth. And the worst part? It was familiar. When you work in emergency services, you learn to recognize certain smells. And this one, it wasn't the smell of a dead body. It was something that was dying slowly but still clinging to life with its teeth. The call came in around 2:30 in the morning. Unconscious man on a park bench in an area known for heavy drug use, trafficking, and even some recent disappearances. Nothing out of the ordinary, or so we thought. I went with Matt, my partner that night. We've worked together on plenty of bizarre cases, but nothing like this. The radio crackled with the address and we exchanged a glance. The street led to Jacaranda Park, a place that was sketchy even during the day. Now, imagine it at night. Dark, silent, with a low mist that made everything look like a scene from an 80s horror movie. When we arrived, the iron gate was slightly ajar. A sharp noise came from the back, like metal scraping on the ground. But we ignored it. We were conditioned to focus on the task at hand. The smell, however, was impossible to ignore. It hit us in a strong gust as soon as we stepped out of the ambulance. A sweet and sour stench that seemed to stick to the back of your throat. The flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The trees around us seemed taller than usual. The ground was muddy, and we could hear our boots sinking with each step. The man was sprawled on a concrete bench next to the abandoned bandstand. The scene looked staged. He was slumped to the side, his chin resting on his chest, his arms outstretched, and his feet were covered with black plastic bags, tied with string. At first I thought it was just another case of abandonment. But as we got closer, things changed. His skin looked like melted wax. It had a grayish color stretched over his bones, with some areas that had simply collapsed, as if the flesh had been sucked out from the inside. We tried to make contact. Matt called out, gently tapped his shoulder. Nothing. I went to check his pulse. There was a beat, weak, irregular, but present. And then I noticed. He was looking at me. Just the corners of his eyes without moving his head. That froze me for a few seconds. As I tried to think, I felt heat coming from his feet. It was strange because his skin was cold, but the air around his legs felt warm. A faint mist rose from there. Matt approached to help remove the plastic bags from his feet, thinking it was just someone's makeshift attempt to stay warm. But when we pulled off the first bag, it was like opening a pot of rot. The skin came with it. The back of his leg was practically dissolved. The plastic had melted from the heat of the infection, or whatever it was, and stuck to the flesh. When we peeled it off, it felt like we were tearing off leather. And from inside the wounds, larvae started to come out. Lots of them. White, fat larvae, some with blood, others looking half-cooked. Matt staggered back and vomited. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. The larvae slithered off the bench, fell to the ground and writhed, as if looking for another place to burrow. Some climbed onto my boot. I couldn't react, I just stared. Time seemed to stand still. What snapped me out of it was the sound, a kind of moan. It wasn't coming from the man. It was coming from the park, like the wind passing through a crack and letting out a muffled lament. Matt pulled me, desperate, and we started the transport. In the ambulance, the smell became unbearable. No matter how much we ventilated, the air seemed thicker. The man was still breathing, but with difficulty. His eyes remained open and watching, as if he knew exactly where we were at all times. When we delivered him to the hospital, the emergency staff froze. Not because of his physical condition, but because the smell came with him. One of the doctors said in a low voice, This isn't normal. This man is dead on the inside." We went to the decontamination room. We washed our arms, faces, and changed clothes. Nothing worked. The smell had stuck to us, on our skin, in our hair, inside our noses. When I got home, my wife thought I had stepped on something dead. But it wasn't that. It was like I had brought the very atmosphere of the park with me. The next night, I tried to sleep, but I had nightmares. In the dream, I was back in the park, alone. The bench was empty, but there was a trail of larvae leading me to the bandstand. When I got there, the man was standing, his back to me. He turned slowly, and his face. It was mine. I woke up screaming. The sheet was soaked with sweat. The whole room smelled bad for no reason. I spent 3 days washing everything, spraying products, cleaning, but it seemed like the energy of that night had stuck to me. Matt never returned to duty. He asked for a leave of absence. Sometime later, he sent me a message in the middle of the night. They were inside him, and now they're here. He never responded again. I heard he was hospitalized after having a panic attack in the middle of the street, saying he felt larvae under his skin. The man? He died a few hours after being admitted. No ID, no fingerprints, nothing. His body was catalogued as unidentified and taken to the morgue. But something strange happened. No one wanted to prepare him for burial. One of the technicians refused to touch him, said the body was alive in the wrong way. Days later, I returned to the park, not knowing why. An impulse, perhaps. When I got there, I saw that the bench where the man had been was cordoned off by city tape, and someone had painted something on the concrete, a strange symbol, somewhat circular, with jagged lines and points that looked like thorns. I tried to take a photo, but my phone froze. It only returned to normal when I walked away. Since then, I've started to notice things, like seeing figures out of the corner of my eye, or feeling like someone is watching me when I get into the ambulance. Once, returning from another call, I swear I smelled the same smell coming from the back seat, even though it was empty. I swear. It's like that man didn't die. It's like he passed something on to us, a negative energy, a spiritual presence that's still there, stuck, lurking, waiting, maybe feeding something we don't even understand. There are nights when I close my eyes and feel the larvae again, climbing up my leg, burrowing under my skin, and when I wake up, I don't know if it was a dream or if I'm still in the park. There are calls you never forget, and this was the worst of my life. What a nightmare. What did you think of the story? On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Drop your opinion in the comments. After witnessing something so grotesque, it's hard to imagine anything more disturbing could happen. But sometimes fear doesn't come from what we see. It comes from who approaches in the dead of night. Like in the story you're about to hear now, where a routine hospital procedure turns into a full-blown psychological nightmare. The first thing I noticed was the metallic taste in my mouth, a mix of blood and rust. My dry throat scratched as if I hadn't had water in days, and even before I opened my eyes, I knew something was wrong. The smell gave it away. It wasn't my bed. It wasn't my home. It was a strong smell of disinfectant mixed with that sour tang of expired alcohol and sweat. I tried to move my arms, but one of them was restrained. I could only turn my face slightly to the side, and even without opening my eyes, I sensed the white light, that cold light typical of a hospital. The ringing in my ears sounded like a TV without a signal, you know? And my chest, man, my chest felt heavy, as if I were carrying a truck on my back. It took a good few seconds before I managed to open my eyes, and when I did, I saw the stained ceiling with a flickering fluorescent light right above my head. The beeping of a machine beside me gave me an idea of where I was, a hospital, probably the ICU. Everything seemed calm, but there was a strange silence, an empty kind of silence, as if the place were too vacant for a hospital. It was the middle of the night, I think. I tried to remember how I ended up there. The images came in flashes, jumbled, a party, laughter. Then a feeling of fainting, of falling, and everything went black. I couldn't remember clearly. I just felt an uncomfortable pain in my chest, as if someone had stabbed me from the inside. I was about to try lifting my head a little when I heard the door opening very slowly. It wasn't the sound of a door slamming against the wall. It was soft, almost silent, the kind of sound that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, you know? And then he entered. He was a nurse, or at least he looked like one. He was wearing a lab coat, a surgical mask, gloves, but no ID badge. And his face was half hidden in shadow. The only light on in the room was that weak fluorescent one above my head, casting everything else in a dim, yellowish glow. He didn't say anything. He just came in and walked straight toward me, pushing an IV stand with a new bag hanging from it. The way he walked was odd, too rigid. Each step seemed measured, as if he had practiced walking that way. I watched, trying to focus better, but my vision was still a bit blurry. That's when it started. He stopped beside my bed, took my left hand, which was tied to the side of the bed, and began fiddling with the IV access. But the way he held my hand, it was too firm. There wasn't that usual care nurses have. It was cold, almost mechanical. I felt the needle go in, and it stung right away. It was as if he had missed the vein on purpose. I complained. I spoke softly, but it hurt. It hurts. He didn't respond. He just kept at it. He pulled the needle out, looked at my arm as if dissatisfied, and tried again. And again. And again. Each time worse. Each jab was deeper, more painful. I could feel the blood trickling, warm, staining the sheet. I started to tremble, not from the cold, from fear. I tried to pull my hand away, tried to turn my body, but I was too weak. And he said nothing. He just breathed heavily. That muffled breathing through the mask, thick, as if he were holding back anger. And that's when I heard his voice for the first time. "It's your fault." It was abrupt, out of nowhere. He was still looking down at my arm, but he said it as if he had been holding on to that for a long time. His voice was hoarse, low, but there was a tone of hatred there, a resentment I couldn't understand. My whole body froze. Right then, I thought, who is this guy? I tried to speak, to ask, but my mouth barely opened. I was dizzy, weak. My heart was beating erratically, and the ringing in my ears came back full force. His presence was heavy. The energy he brought into the room was like a dark, dense cloud. And the worst part, it was as if he knew me. He stuck the needle in again, this time harder. I screamed, and this time he looked at me, not fully. He was still half in shadow, but his eyes were sunken, as if there was nothing inside them. And yet, I felt he was staring at me, as if he could see everything, my mistakes, my failures, my sins. "You wanted this, now deal with it," he said. The pain in my arm was one thing, but the pain inside my head was worse. It was as if he had exposed me, as if he had torn out a piece of my soul and thrown it in my face. And I still couldn't understand why. The machine's beeping started to speed up. I didn't know if it was my heart racing or my mind trying to escape. I tried to scream, to call for someone, but my voice wouldn't come out. I was trapped, immobile, being tortured by someone who shouldn't even have been there. He tried again. Another jab. I could no longer feel my right arm. Just pain, just anger, just fear. Then he stopped. He was silent for a few seconds, staring at me, his head slightly tilted to the side, as if he were analyzing a failed experiment. "Pathetic," he muttered. He dropped the needle, turned, and left the room as if nothing had happened. He didn't even close the door, and I lay there, bleeding, trembling, trying to understand what it all meant. I was still alive, but I was sure something inside me had died that night. It took a while before someone entered the room again. I don't know if minutes or hours had passed. All I know is that I lay there, trying not to pass out again. My arm was still bleeding, but what bothered me most was the feeling that I had been invaded, as if someone had tampered where they shouldn't have, inside my head. When the door opened again, a bright light flooded in. A nurse rushed in with a technician, and the strong light from the hallway filled the room. She looked at me and froze. My God! What happened to him? I tried to speak, but my mouth still wouldn't obey. The woman ran to my side, pulled back the sheet, looked at my arm, and turned pale. There were marks from multiple puncture attempts. Some were still bleeding, others were already bruised. The technician left to get the doctor, and I saw the desperation in her eyes as she stopped the bleeding and checked my vitals. "Who changed his IV?" she asked, but more to herself than to me. The first thing that came to my mind was the image of that nurse, the way he moved, the voice, that phrase. But I couldn't say for sure if he was really part of the staff or not. The only certainty was that he shouldn't have been there. When the doctor entered, he also froze. He examined me quickly, ordered me to be sedated and given another IV access, and kept asking the staff who had performed the previous procedure. No one knew. No one had ordered the IV change. No one had seen anyone entering my room that night. I tried to explain, but the sedative was already taking effect. I talked about the man, the covered face, the pain. I said he kept saying it was my fault, that he was punishing me as if I had done something horrible. The doctor exchanged a strange look with the nurse, and then he said, "This has happened before." That sentence jolted me awake. He saw that I was conscious again and approached. Years ago, a patient reported something similar, always in the middle of the night, always with an unidentified nurse. He also spoke strange phrases and vanished. No one could ever explain it. We thought it was delirium, until now. My stomach turned. This wasn't just about me. I wasn't hallucinating. The next morning, they reviewed the hallway camera footage. The curious thing was that my room didn't have a camera pointing directly at the door, but in the hallway footage, a shadowy figure was seen entering, and then nothing. No image of the person leaving, and the time between the recordings was as if there were a gap there, an interval where everything stopped for a few minutes. They started an investigation, held meetings with the staff, and checked the shifts. No nurse from the ICU ward had entered my room at that time. No blood-stained lab coat was found. Nothing. Just me, and my arm full of marks, and the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching me. In the days that followed, the hospital returned to its normal rhythm. People coming and going, monitors beeping, muffled voices in the hallways. But inside the room, the air felt heavy. I sensed a presence, as if he were still there, as if at any moment he might return. Every night, before closing my eyes, I would stare at the door for a while. Sometimes I heard footsteps outside, but no one entered. Sometimes I saw the hallway light go out for a few seconds, and then come back on without explanation. I stayed in the hospital for 5 more days, long enough to recover physically, but what he did to me, it didn't heal. I left that hospital, but the feeling of being punished for something I'm not even sure I did stayed with me. His face, or rather the absence of a face, still appears in my dreams. And that voice, "It's your fault," still echoes in my ears, especially when I'm alone. I told this story to some friends, to my therapist, and they all try to rationalize it. They say it was the effect of the overdose, that my brain mixed hallucination with reality. But there's one thing no one can explain: the marks on my arm. They lasted for weeks, as if each needle attempt was a signature, a reminder. A few months later, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail recorded it. It was just breathing, slow, heavy, and at the end, a hoarse voice saying, "It's still your fault." Since then, I can't go near any hospital. Just hearing the beep of a machine makes my heart race. I don't know if that was real, if it was a spirit, a spiritual presence trapped in that hospital, or just my conscience trying to hold me accountable for something. But I know what I felt. I know what I lived through, and no matter how much no one believes me, I still feel it. He's out there, waiting for his next nighttime visit. Creepy, right? There are moments when the real horror lies in the hidden intent behind a human face. But what if the terror is out in the open, rotten, alive, and staring right at you? This next story shows exactly that, with details you'll probably wish you could forget. But chances are you won't. The smell came before everything else. Before the door opened, before we saw the patient, even before we turned off the ambulance engine. That smell was already there. A strong, rancid odor that clung to our nostrils like old mildew in a closed cabinet. We had handled tough situations before, seen it all. Exposed fractures, stab wounds, shootings. But nothing, absolutely nothing compared to what Clara and I witnessed that morning. The call came in around 6:30. It was an emergency call from a village farther from the city center. The emergency operator only said it was about a bedridden man with a history of diabetes and open wounds on his legs. They mentioned the smell in the room was unbearable. That was it. I thought it might be an exaggeration. Some people get easily scared by certain things, but when we got out of the ambulance and the building's doorman made sure to keep his distance, covering his face with his shirt, I realized it wasn't an exaggeration. It was real. It was heavy. Clara started complaining as soon as we got out. She had always been sensitive to strong smells. She carried one of those eucalyptus-scented inhalers in her vest pocket. But even that didn't help that day. We went up wearing masks, but the stench seemed to seep through everything. The elevator was old and slow, and with each floor we passed, the smell only got worse. By the time we reached the 5th floor, it was hard to breathe without feeling nauseous. The apartment was the last one in the hallway. Wooden door, peeling paint. We knocked. No answer. We pushed gently. It was unlocked, and then it hit us. The smell was overwhelming. It wasn't just dirt or lack of hygiene. It was something more. Something that mixed rotting flesh with dampness, feces, and death. Clara gagged immediately. She had to turn away, covering her face with her shirt. I went in first. The lights were off. A sliver of light came through the crack in the window, barely illuminating what was inside. The entire place seemed frozen in time. There were piles of old newspapers, dirty dishes stacked on a chair, and a mattress on the living room floor. That's where he was. The man. Thin, yellowish skin, long and unkempt beard. He wore only a grimy t-shirt and what used to be jeans shorts. His legs. That's where my stomach turned. I'll never forget what I saw. Never. The bandages looked like part of his body. They were so old, so grimy. They had lost their color. Some were stuck to his skin, others loosely hanging, as if they were falling apart. Flies buzzed slowly, landing on the edges, and an irritating hum filled the silence. "Sir, my name is Raphael. I'm a paramedic. We're here to help you, okay?" He didn't respond. He just slightly moved his head as if to say, "Okay," but without any strength or voice. I crouched down near him, trying to assess the condition of his legs. Clara came in right after, coughing, her mask tightly pressed against her face. She looked at me with wide eyes. I knew she was about to vomit, and Clara had seen people shot in alleys, with warm blood flowing down to their knees. "I need to remove these bandages, okay? It's going to hurt a little, but I'll be as careful as possible." I started slowly. I took the scissors and began cutting the loose ends. When I lifted the first piece of gauze, I felt the nausea rise. The smell, which was already bad, seemed to come alive. There was pus, necrotic tissue, and a greenish color indicating a severe infection. But the worst came when I removed the second layer. Larvae. Yes. White, fat larvae, wriggling inside the wound as if it were their natural habitat. Some squirmed, trying to escape the light. Others just stayed there, burrowing into the flesh. Clara turned away and vomited in the hallway. I closed my eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and continued. "Sir, how long have these wounds been like this?" He turned his face to the side. His voice came out weak, almost in a whisper. 10 months, more or less. 10 months. I wanted to ask if he hadn't been to any hospital, if he hadn't sought help, but I knew that answer wouldn't come. You could see in his expression that he had given up on everything a long time ago. Carefully, I removed the rest of the bandages. The skin tissue was loose in some spots, like wet paper. The larvae were in almost all areas of his legs. Some wounds were so deep you could see the bone. I was shaking, not out of fear, but from shock. My mind tried to understand how someone could reach that state and still be alive. I used an antiseptic solution to clean as much as I could right there. The gloves were soaked with blood, pus, and a thick liquid oozing from the wounds. The mask didn't help anymore. The smell was inside my head. It seemed to have seeped into my brain. I called for backup on the radio. The case was severe. He needed urgent surgery, or he wouldn't last much longer. Clara had recovered from vomiting and came back to help, even though she was pale. We managed to get the man onto the stretcher carefully, trying not to worsen the wounds any further. As we went down in the elevator, a fly escaped from inside his shirt and landed on my arm. That gave me a chill that ran up my back and froze the nape of my neck. I wanted to take a shower right there, in the elevator. I felt like the energy of that place had clung to us. It was heavy, suffocating. At the hospital, we rushed him straight to the operating room. The doctors were ready to intervene, and we waited in the waiting room. Clara couldn't stop shaking. I just sat there, trying to understand what had just happened. But the worst was yet to come. The surgery lasted more than 3 hours. We waited outside, in a corner of the emergency room, where people were constantly coming and going. Even with all the movement, the smell still seemed to be there. Not the same, of course, but a memory of it. An invisible, dense presence that hung in the air and made everything heavier. Clara didn't say a word. She just looked at the floor, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. I didn't say anything either. The only thing on my mind was the sound of those larvae wriggling in the flesh, that wet, sticky noise that seemed to have gotten stuck in the back of my ear. When the surgeon came to talk to us, he looked tired. He said the condition was serious, but they had managed to contain the infection in time. They removed some of the dead tissue and isolated the wounds. He would be hospitalized for a long time under observation. I asked if there was a risk of amputation, and he just replied with "It depends on the next few days." That kept echoing in my mind the whole time. 2 weeks passed. During that time, we followed the case from afar. The doctors did what they could. He responded well to the first stage of treatment, despite his extreme debilitation. But what marked me the most was when I returned to the hospital to drop off a signed form and met the ward nurse. He called me aside, speaking in a strange tone. "Man, there was a night we thought he was going to die. His blood pressure dropped, his vital signs plummeted, and then out of nowhere he started laughing. Softly, but a dry laugh. Some nurses refused to enter the room after that." I could only respond with a raised eyebrow. We hear that kind of comment from time to time. Patients do delirium, especially in advanced states. But then he continued, "That's not all. He says he feels someone near him, that there's a woman standing in the corner of the room, always in the corner, and that she doesn't say anything, just stands there watching." We thought it might be delirium, but one night a technician said she felt the same thing, as if someone was there, watching, and the room was empty. Just him, and that smell. A smell that never goes away, no matter how much they clean. The conversation left me unsettled. Not because of the woman in the corner, those stories always pop up in hospitals. It's a charged place. But because of the detail about the smell. Because I also couldn't forget it. No matter how much I washed my uniform or how much soap I used. Sometimes out of nowhere it came back. On the bus, in the elevator, even at home. And it always came with that strange feeling. Like when you feel someone is behind you, even though you know you're alone. A month later, the patient was discharged. He was physically better but visibly disturbed. He spoke little, avoided eye contact, and seemed to always be somewhere else. Home care was authorized with regular visits from the medical team. I went to his apartment a few weeks later. The door was locked with a padlock, and no one answered. The neighbor next door said he rarely went out. She also said that from time to time she heard him talking to someone, but always in the same tone, low, measured, as if he were answering questions that weren't asked out loud. The apartment exuded the same smell, subdued but still present. It was as if the place had absorbed the suffering, as if the rot wasn't just in his flesh but in the walls, the floor, in every object abandoned in the corner of the room. When I went in to check, the mattress was still there, but empty. There were marks on the floor indicating he slept right there. And in the corner, in the same corner where the nurse said he saw the woman, there was a chair. Old, dark wood. as if someone used it to wait. I left there with a weight on my chest, and that weight stayed with me for months. Sometimes I dream about the scene, the smell, the larvae wriggling. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking there's someone in the room, standing in the corner just watching me. And the worst part is that, even when I turn on the light and see there's nothing, I still smell it. Faint. Far away. But it's there. Maybe he never really left that room. Maybe he took something with him that wasn't just his. And maybe, just maybe, that something is coming back. So disturbing. Some images just stick with you. The smell, the texture, that gut feeling that something is very wrong. And sometimes the body gives signs that something goes way beyond medical explanation. Just like in the case you're about to hear. An incident no one in that ER could explain. But before we move on with the story, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying the content. So go ahead and hit the like button to let YouTube know you want more horror stories like this, and so you don't miss the next one. The night had already started off weird even before the woman arrived. The energy in the ER was heavy, strange, as if the air was denser, harder to breathe. The lighting seemed dimmer than usual, and even the sound of the machines felt muffled. I swear, at one point I thought it was just exhaustion kicking in. But after that night I learned there are some things you just feel and can't quite explain. It was close to 3 a.m. when the emergency doors burst open. The sound of the wheelchair's wheels echoed down the empty hallway, and one of the paramedics rushed in, pushing an elderly woman who looked extremely frail. Her skin was almost translucent, thin, covered in purple bruises. Her eyes were wide open but unfocused, as if she was looking right through us. The guy who brought her in, a paramedic named Arnold, was visibly shaken. He was sweating, tense, trying to keep it together, but his hands were trembling. He spoke to the patient in a low voice as if trying to calm her down, but she didn't react. She just sat there, slumped, breathing heavily, letting out a weak groan every now and then. "She started like this all of a sudden," he said. Her daughter called 911 because she spent the whole night saying there was something rotting inside her. They thought it was just senile delirium. But when I got to the house, man, the smell. It was like someone had left rotten meat scattered in the corners. Nurse Lucy looked at me with that look of someone who had seen a lot of strange things, but was still unsettled by the story. Arnold still held onto the elderly woman's shoulder as she began to tremble. It was an irregular, dry tremor. Her head fell forward, and her body started to slump. He tried to hold her up, but it happened too fast. She let out a deep sigh and suddenly collapsed into his arms. The scene turned to chaos. Lucy and I rushed over, pulled out the stretcher, laid the woman down, and started resuscitation procedures. Arnold stood frozen for a few seconds before stepping aside. The doctor arrived almost instantly and began coordinating the protocols. Mask, ambu bag, adrenaline, defibrillator. But something was off. Her body felt strange. There was no pulse at all, not a single heartbeat, not even the slightest reaction to the shock. And then came the moment that changed my life. In the middle of our attempts, the woman spasmed. Her mouth opened unnaturally, as if her jaw had unhinged, and she started vomiting. But it wasn't normal vomit. It was a thick, viscous, dark liquid, with a color between moss green and bluish black. The smell that spread at that moment, it was as if something inside her had died days ago. It wasn't just rotten. It was an aggressive smell that seemed to stick to your throat, your eyes, your stomach. I started coughing, turned my face away trying to avoid gagging, but it was impossible. It was as if the odor had crawled inside me. The liquid spread across the stretcher onto the floor and even seemed to climb up our gloves as if it were alive. Lucy staggered back, covering her mouth. The doctor's face paled, but there was no time to hesitate. We had to keep trying to revive the patient. I grabbed the suction kit and the portable aspirator while one of the technicians cleaned up with reinforced gloves and cloths. But it seemed like the more we cleaned, the more came out, as if that sludge had no end. I remember looking at her again, and for a brief second I thought her eyes, which had been unfocused, were now fixed on me. A direct, empty, but conscious stare. My heart stopped. It was as if there was a presence there that didn't belong to that frail body. Something that was just using that old woman as a vessel. But still, we kept trying. Adrenaline, compressions, oxygen mask. The doctor shouted commands. The staff tried to protect themselves from that disgusting liquid, and the smell only got worse. It wasn't normal. No human body releases something like that. Not even in the worst cases of necrosis or sepsis. This was something else. And the entire room seemed consumed by a silent panic. No one spoke, just medical commands and the sound of the defibrillator. But in everyone's eyes, you could see that this wasn't just another critical case. It was as if we were in the middle of something that shouldn't be happening. The sludge finally stopped coming out. The woman's mouth slowly closed and her body relaxed. A heavy silence filled the room. The monitor still showed a flat line. The doctor looked at the clock and declared the time of death. No one moved for a few seconds. The smell still lingered in the air. I looked at the floor and saw dark stains that seemed to move. I felt dizzy, weak. I tried to focus on cleaning up, but my thoughts were jumbled. It was as if, beyond the horrible scene, there was something invisible in the room. A heavy, suffocating energy, almost tangible. As if there was a mark left in the air, something we couldn't see but could feel on our skin. And there, in that cold room lit by weak fluorescent lights, I knew that night wasn't over, and that the worst might still be to come. We tried to follow protocol, clean everything, seal the room, call the sanitation team, but nothing seemed enough. The floor, even after being scrubbed 3 times with disinfectant, still felt slippery, oily, as if that sludge had seeped into the floor, the walls, everything. And the smell wouldn't go away. It was as if it had gotten inside our skin. After they took the body away for autopsy, Arnold, the paramedic who brought the woman in, disappeared without a word. He got in his car and left the hospital in the middle of his shift without even saying goodbye. They said he stopped his car at a rest stop on the highway, locked himself inside for hours, eyes wide, staring at nothing. The ambulance team had to go get him. He couldn't form sentences. He just kept repeating something softly, like a prayer. She's inside. She's still inside. After that, he never came back to work. I tried to finish my shift normally, but I couldn't. The smell seemed stuck inside my nose. I even rubbed my face with alcohol, rinsed my nostrils with saline, even used Vicks. Nothing worked. When I got off shift and into my car, my uniform was already in the trash. But I swear, it was as if that stench had gotten into the seat belt, even the steering wheel. I got home with a headache and nausea that wouldn't go away. I locked myself in the bathroom and took a scalding hot shower. And even then, that night, I couldn't sleep. When I finally dozed off, I woke up with a start, sweating, smelling that same odor again. It was as if the sludge was dripping from my bedroom ceiling. The next day, I went to work with a horrible feeling in my chest. The team was strange, quiet, avoiding talking about what had happened. Only Lucy pulled me aside and whispered, "You felt it too, didn't you? That presence?" I just nodded. I couldn't even respond. A few days later, the hospital found out that no one wanted to go into the room where the woman had died. Cleaning staff started reporting headaches, nausea, and even mild hallucinations. One of them said he saw the wheelchair moving on its own in the corner of the room. Another swore she felt someone whisper in her ear while mopping the floor. The department decided to isolate the wing for electrical maintenance, but those who worked there know that wasn't the reason. And the weirdest part, the patient's medical records disappeared from the system. No file, no history, not even a name. It was as if she had never existed. But we saw her, we treated her, tried to save her, saw her vomit that stuff, smelled the odor. I thought about asking for a leave of absence. I even sought psychological help. But how do you explain to someone that you're being haunted by a smell? That you feel the presence of a dead woman every time you step into the hospital? There was a night, about 2 weeks later, when I was alone in the break room and heard that same sound of the wheelchair rolling down the hallway, a slow, dragging creak. When I went to look, the hallway was empty, but the smell, it came back. That same smell. I didn't tell anyone, but since then, whenever I have a night shift, I carry a bottle of strong alcohol and a small cross in my pocket. I wasn't one to believe in these things, but after that night, I understood that some deaths don't leave the body. They stay, they wander, they haunt. And that old woman, she didn't die alone. She took something with her, or left something behind. The truth is, I was never the same after that night. I could never walk into an emergency room again without feeling that pang in my stomach, without looking twice at the empty wheelchair in the corner, because sometimes, when everything is too silent, I still hear the creak of the wheels approaching, and the smell. Always that damn smell. Creepy, huh? What did you think of the story? Rate it from 0 to 10 in the comments. I want to know what you think. She called me by my name, but the hallway was empty. It was my second shift in that dementia ward, in a nursing home far from the city center, one of those places where the silence is more unsettling than any scream. I had worked many tough shifts in hospitals, clinics, and even in the middle of the night ER, but nothing compared to the energy of that place. It felt like time moved at a different speed there. Everything was muffled, dark, still, as if the world outside had forgotten that place existed. On the first night, I tried to rationalize. I'm a paramedic, called in to cover an extra shift in the heaviest ward of the nursing home. Patients with advanced dementia, terminal stage Alzheimer's, some with violent episodes. Most didn't even recognize their own reflection in the mirror. But I swear to you, there was something about that environment that went beyond the illness. It was a kind of presence. Invisible, but insistent. You could feel it in your gut, like that chill you get before an accident. On the second day, I was checking the rooms in the east hallway when I heard it. It was a man's voice, raspy, calling, "Andrew," very low, but clear enough to make me turn around instantly. The problem was I was the only one in that hallway. I looked back and only saw the dim light flickering on the ceiling. That froze me for a few seconds. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect to hear in a place where half the patients barely speak. And worse, that voice. It sounded a lot like a patient who, according to the nursing staff, had died right there a week before. Same intonation, same drawn-out way of calling. I didn't know the guy, but later they showed me a monitoring audio where he asked for help before he died. It was the same voice. That same night, there was a strange noise near room 207. It sounded like a prolonged shh, as if someone was asking for silence right beside me. But I was alone. No one around. When I turned to see if someone was playing a trick, the hallway was empty again, but the air felt heavy, as if something had passed by me. I got such a strong chill down my neck that I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. A few minutes later, they called over the intercom for me to check on a patient in room 211. It was an elderly woman who had just lost her roommate. According to the caregiver, she had suddenly freaked out, saying that the thing in the wall was going to pull her if she fell asleep. I got there, and the woman was huddled on the edge of the bed, eyes wide, trembling. When I tried to talk to her, she only said, "She hasn't left. She's still here." I tried to calm her down, talked about anxiety, grief, common hallucinations in Alzheimer's patients, but she just kept saying there was someone sitting in the corner armchair. I looked. The chair was empty. But even so, I felt like there was something there, a feeling of being watched, strong enough to make my heart race. There was another time, a few days later, when 3 patients, none of whom were lucid according to the doctors, started saying they had seen their parents. One of them was screaming that his brother was calling him from the foot of the bed. All the relatives mentioned had been dead for years. That made me wonder, did they know their time was coming? Because 2 of them died that same week. One of the weirdest things was the call bell, those emergency bells by the bed. They started ringing in empty rooms. At first I thought it was a system malfunction, but the technician checked everything, said it was normal. And yet, One of them rang while I was inside the room. I saw the button pressed down by itself, as if someone had pushed it. I ran out of there. There was also the Greek lady, Mrs. Eleni. She was always speaking in a language no one understood. One day I walked into her room and saw her sitting there, staring at the corner of the wall and muttering. She turned slowly and said to me in broken Portuguese, "He doesn't like you." Then she went back to staring into nothingness. I left there with the hairs on my arms standing on end. That week, almost all the patients started repeating the same phrase, each in their own way. "The man is here." One pointed to the ceiling, another to the closet, another said he was hiding behind the curtain. The staff started avoiding being alone in the rooms after midnight. The night shift became torture. No one talked about it out loud, but it was written all over their faces. A fear that couldn't be explained. I started losing sleep. Any noise at night made me jump out of bed. Sometimes I heard that same male voice whispering my name like on the first shift. Andrew, always drawn out, always in the same tone. Once I even dreamed that I was trapped in that ward, and all the patients were looking at me at the same time, murmuring the same thing. "Now it's you." When I asked for a transfer, they said it was common. A lot of people couldn't last more than 3 weeks in that unit. Some quit. Others just disappeared without a word, and no one talked much about it, as if it were a pact of silence. To this day, when I close my eyes, sometimes I still hear the bell ringing, and the voice. Always that damn voice. And I wonder, if all that was a result of the other's illness, why do I still see things in the dark? There are places that aren't just dark. They are hollow, as if they were holes in reality, and inside there everything that is forgotten keeps waiting. And if you made it all the way here, that means you've got the stomach and the curiosity to face the darker side of reality. These hospital horror stories mess with us in a strange way, right? A mix of fear, fascination, and that eerie feeling that something's watching just behind the door. If this kind of content hits home for you, make sure to subscribe. We always bring you real stories that stick with you long after the video ends. And if you're one of the few who stayed till the end, drop this in the comments. Heard every last whisper. Only those who stayed will get it. Leave a like too, if at any point your spine tingled even a little. It helps keep this connection between us alive. There's a video right here that ties in perfectly with this one. Click it and keep watching with me. There's more you'll want to hear.